All right, live. Get the thing on here. All right, here we go.
And cue the intro.
It's time for Let's Sell and Review with your hosts, Wayne Moon, Greg Narlow, and Lou Maddox.
All right, welcome.
Very disturbing intro. Go ahead, Wayne.
Disturbing intro. But, today we are joined with on-air reporter and anchor for KFRC AM San Francisco, writer and co-producer of RKO's Presents the Beatles, writer for Dick Clark's weekly radio countdown. Now she works with television and film as a writer, producer, and casting director. We are joined by Laurie Kaye, who also has a new book out called Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper, My Life Leading Up to John Lennon's Last Interview. Hello, Laurie. Welcome to
Welcome.
Hello, how are you?
Doing
Good.
good. I was very looking forward to doing this interview. I listened to the podcast you did with Chris Jericho a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, we got to get her on because we're all Beatles fans and we all love John Lennon stuff. So I was really excited to hear somebody wrote a book, and then to find out you were the last one to interview John Lennon was, just blew my mind because I didn't know anybody who had the last interview with him. So really cool to see that was you, and glad to have you on the show.
Yes, thank you.
Well,
This is a
thank
big
you.
honor and privilege.
Yeah,
Thank
Happy
you.
to be here.
yeah, thank you, and welcome, James. I didn't know you were coming.
Well, of course I'm going to come. I mean, obviously, this is an amazing story, and also someone who has spent time in the Bay Area like myself, where I was born at. So obviously it's a great time to come in here and do an interview.
Very cool. All right, Laurie. So one day you're part of something like really special, interviewing John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and after they've been out of the spotlight for like 5 years, and then the next day you're on the Today Show and you're talking about the death of John Lennon. What was it like being on the Today Show talking about something that just happened a few hours beforehand?
It was horrifying, to be very honest, because not only was I just consumed by the tragedy, but also the fact that I'd been up all night. I hadn't slept in well over 30 hours probably. And so I was exhausted and I could barely concentrate at all on answering the questions that they were asking me. It was really hard. And I'd been up all night working in the RKO Network New York office, and doing questions, being the interviewee instead of the interviewer. So it was sort of like a continuation of that, and it just made everything that much more difficult.
Yeah, wow. I was watching a little bit of it earlier before the interview, and I could see like you look tired on that interview, and you just look like you went through a lot, just in a few short hours. So I could only imagine. Anybody else want to ask anything else before I continue?
Yeah, I actually, I listen to podcasts. I don't know if they're in the book, but you interviewed John Lennon literally hours prior to his assassination, and I'm not going to mention the asshole who killed him. Fuck him. Excuse my language.
We won't mention him.
Yeah,
Thank you. I don't ever mention his name. I don't write his
Right.
name in my book because I don't want to give him the publicity that he's been after ever since he committed his horrible crime. So I will never say his name, and I hope nobody else does either.
And we
Well, he doesn't
respect
just-
that totally.
he doesn't deserve any kind of infamy for what he did. But so you sat on the story for 43 years. What made you decide that this was the right time to tell your story, not only the interview but also your life and music and career? What was there any sort of thing that prompted that to write a book?
Well, a number of things, actually. Everything from my mother's passing several years before to the pandemic. Because once the pandemic hit, TV production came to a close practically. So I wasn't working all the time like I had been for years and years and years. So suddenly I had this time to sort of think about gee, maybe it's time to get my memory together and come out with the book. And so I started to write and immediately started looking for a literary agent, which I found one fairly quickly. And then also within several months, this same agent told me, gee, Laurie, sorry, I can't deal with you anymore because publishers aren't looking for non-celebrity memoirs these days. There's so many coming out that it's just not something that they're wanting to publish. So I immediately had to start finding my own publisher all on my own. And it was hard. And I was still writing the book when all of a sudden TV production picked up again and I started working again. So that was the end of 2020, and 2021, I worked all year and then didn't start writing again and finishing it up and getting published till 2022.
Well, did you, in the process of writing this book, do you feel you learned something about yourself or your life that you wouldn't have had insight into if you did not take this journey?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's my memoir. It's the story of my early radio-related life and career wrapped around what tragically turned out to be Lennon's last day on the planet, December 8th, 1980, which is also when I co-conducted the RKO radio interview with him and Yoko at the Dakota, mere hours before he was shot and killed. And it's not a Beatles or John Lennon bio. It's my memoir, which is very different. Although, of course, it does feature details and quotes from not just the John Lennon interview, but so many other interviews I've done, everything from Paul McCartney and Linda McCartney and Wings to George Harrison to Ramones, Talking Heads, David Bowie, Mick Jagger, you name it. They're all pretty much in there. And not only that, but my book also features plenty of sex and drugs and rock and roll.
Yeah, we noticed.
Yes, it does.
I had a quick question while you were doing this book, because like you said that you pretty much started this after your mother had passed away. Did this feel like some kind of like a therapeutic, like a cathartic thing to be going through, to kind of go through all your old emotions and reminisce and stuff like that, to help kind of, not like a pseudo therapy session, but kind of like help work through some of those things, the traumatic events and everything? Because I mean, hearing your story about on the Jericho podcast, I listened to it too, of that day going to the hospital and just seeing Yoko in, just in full tears. I mean, that must have been a incredibly traumatic experience. I mean, I know that probably, it must have helped at least a little bit to get all that writing out into the space and everything and get that out of your system.
Well, what it did was it definitely was a step towards getting out of all the guilt that I've been feeling for just about 43 years now. I still feel plenty of guilt. It's still hanging on my head and sitting on my shoulders, but writing my book helped me take a different look at it and try and feel better about my experience.
Now your mother passed away. What would, if she got to read this book? And I know you did it because she wouldn't be able to read it, but what do you think she would think of the book?
Well, as you said, I don't think she would read it. She wasn't that into things I was doing. She never listened to me on the radio or any of my
really?
specials or news. Yeah, it was a dysfunctional family upbringing. At least. And the thing is that I knew in telling stories about her, there were things that she would be insulted by. Even if she didn't read it, if somebody read it who knew her and told her, she would feel bad. And I didn't want to make her feel bad. So that was another reason that I waited so long to write the book.
Yeah. And you got to reconcile with her? Like, how'd that go?
Well, we did get going again after a while because I'm an only child. So when she got ill and there was nobody else to take care of her husband had died also, I was the only one who was available to help her, and she was somewhat appreciative of that. So that did help us get back together as a mother and daughter, and made me look at her and remember so many of the good things that I did love about her and care about her, and everything from what a beauty she had been to her sense of humor. So that helped.
Yeah. Lou, you got something?
Yeah, I love how you went into detail about the points in your life where music played a role in your upbringing. From talking about being on the beach, hearing the Beach Boys, growing up with the Rolling Stones, growing up with the Beatles. We didn't have that experience when they were brand new, when they were dare I say, I wouldn't even know who to compare them to nowadays who would be as impactful as the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. But you got to witness a period of history that most of us wish that we could have seen as it was happening. When you were in the thick of it, of all of that, did you feel like you were a part of some great revolution in culture and arts, or were you always trying to keep it professional and say, no, this is my job, this is what I'm supposed to do, I have to cover this for the radio station or for whoever it is, and just continue and just follow that route?
Well, I was very lucky because my mother and my grandparents were all into music while I was growing up. So they helped me realize how important it was, and very important in my life, even more important than it was in theirs. And it was something that they were all thrilled to have in their lives. My mother had been in love with Frank Sinatra since she was little, and my grandparents were into everything, from Broadway musicals to Lawrence Welk to you name it, anything at the time that turned them on. So it was something I grew up to get excited about. Listening to my transistor radio that my grandparents gave me was thrilling. I literally spent every night in bed with my earplugs in and the transistor radio on, listening to LA top 40 stations, KHJ, another RKO station, sister station of KFRC, where I worked later on. And then I also listened to KRLA. And it was thrilling because I basically was so excited to get to know disc jockeys, which I felt was going on, as well as musicians and songs, and learn all about music. And so by the time I actually got to the point where I could have my own records and go to live concerts, and that turned into eventually working in the music industry, it was beyond belief. It was nothing I ever expected that would happen, because I had no music related people to help me as I was growing up, thinking that I could get a job or get a career or anything. I had no contacts like that. I basically did it all on my own, and it was thrilling.
For working in radio for so long, what do you think radio means now? Do you think it means the same like it used to back when you were in it, or is it completely different now?
I wouldn't say completely different, but I will say somewhat different, bordering on very different, because people now are into listening to music on, Amazon Music or whatever,
Spotify or iTunes,
stuff, whatever Pandora, whatever they want to listen to. So they're not necessarily listening to radio as often as, not only as I did years ago, but as I still do. I can't get in my car without listening to the radio. It doesn't make sense not to listen to the radio. And that's funny because my husband always says, oh, let's listen to, Amazon, or let's listen to Spotify. And I said, no, honey, you want to listen to the radio because you want to hear if a disc jockey says something, you want to hear if there's a news story coming up in between, because that's important to me anyway, as a former newscaster. So that's why I listen to the radio.
Actually, we got a question here from Colin Madden. He says, thanks for doing this, Laurie. Have you ever read Madeline Baccaro's Yoko Ono book?
not only have I read it, I adore Madeline Baccaro, and she's an amazing writer. And when you get my book, you will see that on the back cover, Madeline Baccaro has reviewed it and given me an extremely complimentary comment. Yes, she's been very supportive and helpful, and I try to be the same for her. And you like to stay friends with other writers, especially ones in the same field, and her book is great.
Yeah, very cool.
Cool.
So you ran away from home. How scared were you, being on your own out there with without anybody, any family?
I don't think scared is the word.
Yeah.
I think excited is the word.
Excited.
I was thrilled. I couldn't wait. I'd been waiting for years to have a successful runaway.
Yeah.
And when I was finally able to do it, it was amazingly intense. It was exactly what I wanted. And the funny thing is, I sensed that my mother and my evil stepfather were probably as excited to have me out of their lives as I was to have them out of mine for the time being. So
you seemed like a handful back then.
I was
maybe slightly, Laurie. Oh.
And then in the book too, you also revealed that you actually went to Bali. What was your time like in Bali? I mean, that's a huge move.
Well, the reason I went to Bali was because that year before, I'd had a horrible accident while I was in college at UC Santa Cruz, and I had completely screwed up my ankle and my foot, broken it, and it was very hard to recover. And I was told that I should have major surgery, which not only didn't I want to do, but I didn't have health insurance that would cover it. And so I tried to get other advice on what to do. And one person told me, well, what you should do is do something like Balinese dance, because that will help get your calf and your ankle and your foot back in place once the cast is off. And they said, well, you can go to UC Berkeley. They have Indonesian bands there and dance teachers, and you can do that. And I checked it out, but I realized, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to go get the real thing. So I managed to get a ticket to do that through Stanford. Even though I wasn't a student there, I was able to check in and become the only UCSC student to go and deal with what they did. They sent people to Indonesia and other places in Asia, and what you had to do in order to get the ticket and get your expenses paid and a place to stay was teach English as a second language. So I got my license to teach English as a second language and went to Bali for a year and studied Balinese dance, and it sure did.
Oh. Wayne?
Connections
Totally repair an incredible experience. Bali was incredible. And one of the cool things about it too was years later, when interviewing John Lennon, hearing him talk about how he thought Bali was incredibly cool and beautiful. So it was just another thing that I felt I had in common with him once I met him.
Yeah, very cool. A lot of connections. Do you still talk to, or did you talk to that family after you left Bali that you were staying with?
Briefly, we were in touch, not talking, but by mail. But then it sort of had to drop off because I was so busy with school, and then eventually my internship at KFRC in the newsroom. So I sort of had to put that behind me.
Yeah. Man, you got something?
Well, I was going to see if James did, but if he doesn't, so what was interesting is I think you're the only person outside of the guy who did the ABC special on the Beatles. Well, besides Peter Jackson and Beatles Anthology, I think you're the only person who's talked to 3 of the Beatles. And ironically, the one Beatle you have never talked to is Mr. Ringo Starr. But you've talked to John Lennon and Paul McCartney and George Harrison. What I found interesting in your in your observation was both George Harrison and John Lennon were kind of the same place at the same time, where they both wanted to take time off and raise a family. That was unheard of back then. As a matter of fact, taking 5 years was considered career suicide when you had albums coming out once a year, even twice a year. So I thought that was interesting. You as a journalist, how do you set yourself from not turning into a total fangirl to being professional when you're standing in front of a Beatle that's bigger than any president? It's a Beatle, Laurie. It's, how did you maintain,
Would you say that about Pete Best?
No, but
I didn't think so.
Yeah, but Pete Best played with the Beatles. Only Pete Best can say that. I can't say that, So I'll give him his props. But I mean, Laurie, that's like talking to the Mount Rushmore of rock and roll. You were just missing one guy. That's incredible.
I'm not sure I was able to never be a fangirl, to be honest. Even when I interviewed George Martin, Beatles producer, the man who made the Beatles sound, basically.
Yeah.
And it was just always so exciting. I had plenty of questions to ask because as a reporter, newscaster, that was one thing I did all the time, is interviews and write down questions and come up with ones as I was talking. But it was always being a fan. There was never a time when I was not a fan. And I need to tell you that my interviews with John Lennon and Paul McCartney were with my RKO team of Dave Sholin, and he was the music director at KFRC when I was there, and Ron Hummel, who was our technical producer and an amazing guy as well. And then with John Lennon, we also had Bert Keane from Warner Brothers Geffen Records. So that was really exciting. But my interview with George Harrison was a solo interview, and that was extremely exciting. They were all extremely exciting. I can't, to be honest, think of one interview I've done that wasn't extremely exciting. They were all amazing. I love interviewing rock stars, and I love interviewing authors and news people and everything. I mean, because I'm into music and being on the radio, of course, musicians were my favorite, but it was all incredibly exciting for me.
Colin wants to know.
Go ahead.
Colin wants to know if you still talk to Dave Sholin.
Yes, constantly, and we have done a podcast together, and we email all the time. And he also left an incredibly complimentary comment on my book, which is on the back cover as well. So it was very exciting.
All right, very good. Continue, Manny. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying that was very cool that you interviewed not only 3 Beatles, but also George Martin. I mean, that's I don't even know what to say. I didn't ever interview him. I'm speechless, because there's no band. I love the Rolling Stones. This is mostly a hard rock podcast, heavy metal, but we all love music, because it's not just hard rock. We all love music. But you can't duplicate the impact of the Beatles as a cultural force. I think the closest, maybe Elvis Presley and Bob Dylan a little down the line. I'm just talking about cultural impact. I'm not even talking about just music, just the way people viewed the world. I don't even think that's possible anymore, because we're all so fragmented. So I just think it's amazing that. And then when you think about it, when the Beatles broke up, John Lennon was 30 years old. I mean, when you think how young he was, and him and Ringo were the oldest Beatle. They were 30 years old. It's incredible.
And it's funny because they weren't that old, but they lived a lot in that short span of time. What was it, like 7 or 8 years? The Beatles were
8 years,
62 to 70, right?
And they did so much. And then Laurie, like towards the end of the book, where he starts talking about like him just wanting to settle down and be with his son. It seems like he's like almost like 60 years old the way he's talking. Like he's an old man. Like he wants to settle down, but he was only in his 40s.
only
He
40.
was 40. He had just
Yeah,
turned 40
okay.
in October. But
Right.
the thing about that is also
Mhm.
he was in some way feeling rather guilty about not being able to be a father for his first son from his
Yeah.
first wife,
Oh,
Cynthia.
Julian, right?
Because
Yeah.
he was a Beatle, and not only were they having to record all the time and write music all the time and go on tour, but he was very young, so he didn't want to be a house husband. That wasn't what he was up to. He was into being a rock musician, and so now he had the opportunity to be a house husband, as he called himself, and raise his son, and who he called almost his twin because they were born on the same day, October 9th. And that was very exciting for him and super cool.
I think it's tragic. I remember watching a behind the music special on Julian Lennon back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and there was a period of reconciliation between him and John, and they were supposed to get together before the unfortunate incident happened. I have to admit, being born in 1980, a month and a half before the incident occurred, my first experience to any Lennon was Julian, watching his music video for Much Too Late on a UHF channel here in New York where I was born and raised in Queens. Not realizing that he was a son of a Beatle. Like, I had heard of the Beatles, but I never heard the Beatles. And I have to thank my high school music teacher for really getting me into the Beatles and just seeing what great songs that they had, great melodic passages. And I, as a guitarist, I can't help but be fixated on the greatness of George Harrison. I just feel like he really brought their songs to life with his solos, because they fit the structure of the song without deviating from it. I think the Beatles were probably like the first band to really incorporate guitar solos into songs and make them part of the song. Nowadays, you do have a lot of people who like to use the guitar as an extension of a certain male body part, which I will not mention. But George, I feel like, did it right. He had that je ne sais quoi. He had that the chef's kiss of guitar playing. But I guess my I guess the question that I want to ask is, with and sorry, this is kind of this is a bit difficult to ask. I'm sorry. Knowing that the impact of the incident and people were still talking about this even 10 years after it happened, because I do recall there being a 10-year anniversary of the event in New York City, which was headlined by some of the major pop stars. And the impact is still felt today, 43 years later. What I'm basically asking is it easier for you to be able to process all this today and find some semblance of peace with it, with everything?
Not necessarily. Well, the thing is I did end up moving to New York 5 years following John Lennon's assassination, and it was very difficult for me. I couldn't go to the neighborhood at all. It was just too tragic and just made me feel so horrible. So I pretty much stayed all on the other side of the city, and I still, even years later, going back to visit, feel somewhat the same way. It just still takes me back to what I consider, even 43 years later, to be both the best and worst day of my life. And I don't know that that's ever going to change.
trying to move the subject, move it to a different subject that's really heavy. I just wanted to try to make it a little bit lighter. I was reading, the people in the news department during your time there. Did you have any good Renelle Brooks Moon things? Because I know I'm a huge Giants fan, so I hear her voice all the time listening to the AT&T Park. Her announce the players' names. Do you have any good stories about her?
No.
Oh,
I'm sorry. What? KFR?
Renelle Brooks, the announcer for the public address announcer for the Giants.
The San Francisco Giants.
I honestly don't remember because, to be very honest, I wasn't someone who did a lot of sports stories. There was a reporter who pretty much concentrated on all the sports. And although I did go to some baseball games, that wasn't my thing. More the music related reporter.
Thanks for bringing the show down, James. Man, you gotta,
thanks, Wayne. All right, never mind. All right, I'll leave. Bye, guys.
Who's trying to make it lighthearted? Sorry, I went too deep.
Yeah, Wayne. Yeah. So, no, first of all, again, thank you for coming on. It's such an interesting story. If you were to write that down on paper and give it to a screenwriter, they'd probably reject it because they wouldn't believe it.
Not now, they're on strike.
Well, that too,
Well,
but and it's funny listening to John Lennon's music. It occurred to me, I was reading your book. When I was younger, I didn't totally get it. I didn't have a lot of life experience, and a lot of his solo work was so introspective, so personal. Even on Double Fantasy, Woman, which is a love song toward Yoko, Watching the Wheels, where he's talking about watching, just taking a step back and, letting the fame go. And, did the John Lennon that you met, was as he is introspective as his music was at that time? How did you find the John Lennon you met? What did you, as a human being, what did you think of him? Forget the artist, just as a man.
The John Lennon I met 40 years ago was incredibly intelligent, funny, and determined, along with his wife, Yoko Ono, to improve the relationships between men and women going forward. Because as he saw it, the 70s had been pretty horrible. That was his bad time when he had his, what they called his lost weekend in LA away from Yoko. And so here he was back with her now, and they wanted to do everything that they had done, show other couples how to have a dialogue between them, how to improve their relationship. And even though he wasn't ready to say, oh yeah, we have a perfect relationship, he was still ready to show, along with Yoko, couples how they could improve their own relationship by improving their dialogue. And that's how Double Fantasy was basically put together. When John would come up with his song and sing it to Yoko, and then she, a couple hours later, would come up with one that it prompted her to do and sing to him, and they would go back and forth like that. And that's how the incredible songs came out. And they each had favorites that each other had written. It was great.
It seems like to be a call and response between, you're right, and looking at the album, especially when you take a fresh look at it. You have a John Lennon song, Woman, and then she'll respond. Again, instead of Double Fantasy, it should have been, dialogue, or maybe it should have been called, because it's definitely a musical dialogue between two artists. And what's incredible, because Yono got a lot of shit about breaking up the Beatles, which is nonsense. The Beatles broke up because they've been living in each other's pockets for 8 years and they just grown apart. Had nothing to do with Yoko, but she got a lot of crap. And it's funny, I don't really like her solo material, but on that album, I kind of like it. It's a little ahead of its time because it's almost new wavy in some of those tunes, kind of what the B-52s were doing at the time. And I know John Lennon loved Rock Lobster, which blows me away that he loved that so much, but which is also shows a lot about John Lennon as an artist, that he was looking forward. Whatever you may think of the B-52s, that the B-52s in 1980 was considered, wow, very different, groundbreaking. Did you find John Lennon also to be an adventurous person at that point in time when you met him?
Adventurous in terms of music he listened to, you mean?
Not only music he listened to, but music he was creating at that point in time.
Well, yes. And the thing was, he hadn't really listened to music for years before. He didn't want to listen to new music. And even though his assistants tried to keep playing him things and saying, oh, you should hear this, he didn't want to. But finally, he ended up doing so. And it was inspirational to him because he heard what he thought was people imitating Yoko, which was amazing, you know? So he was excited about that. And he was just ready to keep going forward, to keep going up. And that was amazing because having recorded Double Fantasy, they had enough songs already to do the second album. And they were already talking about what they would put on the third album. And it was so exciting to hear.
Wow. What could have been is what all I think about, now. It's amazing. Now, Wayne, what do you got?
I'm going to give James another chance. No wrestling and no sports talk.
Yeah, no sports, James. For God's sake.
I'm not saying nothing.
Kidding.
Go ahead.
We give James
one
a
comment as
hard
someone who
time.
was
He's a
in the
great.
thing, and this is what I get anyway.
That's it.
No, actually, I really enjoyed the story you told about how John met Yoko. Was at an art exhibit. Even though he wasn't a big fan of the art itself, he was there and got mesmerized by that. I always think that's a very it shows how he was as a character, that he was compassionate and almost like, even if it wasn't his thing, he was still out there to experience it because maybe he'd catch an inspiration, or it would trigger something else in his life that he would enjoy. So any let's see what the best way to put this. Thanks for putting me on the spot, Wayne. Wasn't ready for a question, but any other artists that you interviewed or anything that would have like the same mindset, but a very similar way of thinking or wavelength of that type of thought process?
I'm not sure I really understand your question.
Like that had like that adventurous, like kind of like had that adventurous but like kind spirit that John Lennon had.
Well, I always found good things about the people I interviewed, and everyone from Paul McCartney to George Harrison told similar stories with John, for example, about their interest in Elvis Presley and rock and roll friends that they had who'd passed away. So that was very inspirational to me. But John was an amazing interview and very unique. And it was wonderful to have Yoko with him too, because she would throw in some comments as well, and John would be excited to hear her do that. And it was a wonderful time to spend with them, hours, and it made me think, wow, I've made friends. These are going to be amazing friends for the rest of my life. And I was absolutely sure that was what was going to happen, because by the end of the interview, we'd all made plans to get together in a couple weeks when John and Yoko were going to be out in California, and we were all going to go out to dinner at Yoko's favorite Japanese restaurant. And so Dave and Ron and Bert and I were all excited about that. And I was thinking, I have so much in common with John and Yoko, even though we're all different people from different countries, born in different decades. I still feel so much in common with them. So it was just something I was looking forward to the minute we talked about it.
Have you ever got to talk to Yoko after that?
No, I haven't. The thing is that once I heard that John had been shot, and I went to the hospital and looked through the big glass door and saw Yoko inside, holding on to somebody who at the time I didn't know who it was, but afterwards I found out it was David Geffen, sobbing hysterically. And I wanted to go in and hug her and say, oh, Yoko, I'm so sorry. But I realized that she was so tragic.
Oh, yeah.
John hadn't just been shot, that John was killed, and she knew it. And even though they hadn't announced that yet, news, radio, or TV or anything, I just knew that that would happen. And I didn't want to go in there and make her see me and get even more upset, because obviously I would remind her of the tragedy.
Right.
So instead, I went outside and called my former news director, who is now the head of the RKO radio network headquarters in New York, and told her what was going on. And she said, "Get up here immediately." And I went there, and that's where I worked all night, basically being the interviewee for newspapers and radio, all over the country, all over the world. And then on the next morning on the Today Show. And that was how that day ended for me.
Yeah, wow. Well, James, this is how you lighten the mood up a little bit. Two of my favorite stories in the book, a funny thing, one with Jerry Garcia and one with the Ramones. Tell the Jerry Garcia story, because I think that's very funny, and the way you describe him coming up to you.
Well, I describe it quite clearly in my book.
Yeah.
What happened was,
Buy the book.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was super excited because, wow, I was all set to go see Iggy Pop. And I loved Iggy Pop.
Mm.
And because I was a huge David Bowie fan back then, this was in 77, and I was a huge Iggy Pop fan as well. So I got to the club, which was Bill Graham's Old Waldorf in San Francisco. And my date and I were there. We were so excited. And of course, I'd read and heard so many things about Iggy Pop in concert that sometimes he, basically, I don't want to say anything bad, but did
Say it.
This is the place where you can say that.
You don't watch this show.
in public in front of the audience, and and then also did things like cut himself and bled and throw things at the audience. And so I was super excited to see what this amazing punk was going to be doing at his show. And I was so excited, and I was right in front with my date, and we were all excited, and Iggy was singing, and all of a sudden this weird, creepy old guy came up to me and was asking me, what's this? What are you here for? Why do you like punk? What's it got to do? And I looked at him thinking, who the hell are you? Leave me alone. And he kept bugging me, and it just kept bothering me more and more. And I gave him a dirty look, and he said, well, if you really like punk, I can take you backstage afterwards and you can meet Iggy Pop. And I looked at him and said, yeah, who are you? Somebody's grandfather?
Oh,
Jeez.
Ridiculous. And
man.
he looked at me kind of sad, and all of a sudden my date looked at me and said, Laurie, don't you know who that guy is? And I said, no, he's just some creepy guy trying to, get on top of me and deal with me. And he said, no, look at his hand. And I looked at his hand, and all I saw was one of his fingers was all screwed up.
Yeah.
And it didn't mean anything to me. And my date said, Laurie, that's Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead. And I was like, ew, because I was not a Grateful Dead fan.
Yeah.
I was anything but a Grateful Dead fan. And Bill Graham, who was a friend of pretty much everybody at KFRC at the time, had given me tickets to go see Iggy Pop, and was always trying to get me to go see the Grateful Dead too, which he was always promoting. And I kept saying, no, I'm not a fan. And he kept saying, yes, if you want tickets to this other concert, you have to take my Grateful Dead tickets. And so most of the time I would take them and give them away to somebody else at the station because it just wasn't my thing. And although years later I did go see the Grateful Dead and became a bit more of a fan of them, but that one conversation I had with the guy who I found out later was Jerry Garcia, I insulted him, and I feel bad about it because I'd never got to apologize and interview him or anything. before he died. So I felt very bad.
Yeah. I just thought that was funny though.
I think it's really cool that you mentioned Bill Graham. I mean, that's a name that's synonymous with rock concerts throughout especially the 70s and 80s, all the bands that he had booked on bills in California, from everyone from like you said, the Grateful Dead to Santana to Journey to Metallica. I mean, you don't have a concert promoter around nowadays with that kind of prestige like Bill Graham. I mean, you have Live Nation and Ticketmaster. That's it. I mean, they've pretty much monopolized the entire concert arena. But with knowing, who Bill Graham was at the time, I mean, with the concerts that he was booking, I just feel like a lot of people, if they wanted to book a good concert, would have had a lot to learn from him. But if you could explain to anyone who doesn't know who Bill Graham is, if you could just give like a brief description of like how, I don't want to say how much power, because I feel like that's a bit ridiculous, but how much credibility he had.
A lot, because not only was he a major venue owner and a band manager, but he was so excited about bringing bands to play, especially new bands, and getting them to play in cool clubs for the very first time and important concerts. And the very first show that I remember, basically hearing about Bill Graham and thinking how important he was when he promoted and put together the Rolling Stones Nicaragua benefit concert in Los Angeles back in early 1973, after Nicaragua had a horrible situation where not only people were killed in an earthquake, but left homeless, and it was awful. And so he wanted to get money to them and help them however he could. So he got the Rolling Stones to do a benefit concert for them, because the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger's wife, Bianca, was Nicaraguan. So it made sense that he would do that to help, her relatives and fellow country people. And then the opening act for that show, Santana, also had a band member who was Nicaraguan. So that made sense as well. And I was really lucky to win a contest that gave me tickets to that concert. So not only was it my very first time seeing the Rolling Stones, I was no longer a virgin when it came to Rolling Stones live shows, but it also was my very first experience thinking about what a great person Bill Graham was, and how cool it was of him to do this for a country that had been caught up, in horror. And it was thrilling. And that's basically Bill Graham. He was not just a very cool person and very considerate and caring about musicians, but about people in general. And it was so amazing for me to get to know him once I worked at KFRC, because he seemed to drop by the station almost weekly, if not more often, bringing tickets to shows for us and to talk about things he had coming up. And it was very exciting. And one of my favorite parts about working at KFRC.
If I'm correct, one of the venues of the many that he was responsible for, the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco.
Yes.
Yeah, there's some great concert footage on YouTube of bands in the 70s who played there, and I have to say, it's some of the, I don't know what magic was about that stage and that speaker, but it captured some of these bands' best performances, like, before they hit their peak, when they were at their I guess for example, I do love the band Kiss. I grew up on them. And there's video footage of them playing the Winterland Ballroom from their 1974, early 75 tour. And it's the best live concert footage that I've ever seen in them. And it's in black and white. But I mean, the Winterland just seemed like it seemed like if there was any venue that you wanted to be a part of other than CBGB's in, like, let's say 1977, it seemed like it was the Winterland.
Well, Winterland was very cool, and concerts there were very cool. It was wonderful to be able to go there. And but there were so many other things that Bill Graham did as well. And I really liked the old Waldorf best of all, to be honest, because it was a smaller club and it gave me the opportunity to see amazing bands in a much smaller environment. Everyone from AC/DC to Elvis Costello to Tom Petty, Iggy Pop. It was super cool.
If things hadn't worked out with a publisher, would you have considered self-publishing? Such as, I know my sister-in-law just self-published her books through Amazon. Would that have been an avenue that you would have considered undertaking had it not worked out with the publisher?
No, because to be honest, even though some people are so good at it, for example, Madeline Baccaro, self-published, and do a great job, that's not something that I felt comfortable doing because I had so much else to do that I couldn't see doing it on my own. And I wanted a publisher. I wanted them to read it. I wanted them to edit it. I didn't want to have to be responsible for finding someone to do that on my own. And there's a lot of people who are into self-publishing and think that it's much more worthwhile because then they don't have to deal with looking for a literary agent or a traditional publisher, but that's not me. And my publisher is an independent traditional publisher, a small publisher, but still, so far, it's worked out well. So hopefully it will continue to, and the book will do well. And when I say do well, I mean people will like it. That's the main thing. That's what I really want to happen. And I'm very lucky because I've already won a Writer's Digest award for my book in their memoir category. So hopefully that is a good sign.
I hope so. A few more questions before we get out of here. Colin wanted to know, do you interview Paul and John at the same time, like the same period of time?
Not really. Paul McCartney and Linda and their latest lineup of Wings, our RKO team went to London to interview in June of 79.
Okay.
And that was about 6 months after I had interviewed George Harrison. And I didn't interview John Lennon with the RKO team until December of 1980. So that was about a year and a half later.
Okay. Yeah, because he wanted you to compare like the contrasts from where they were in their lives at that point. But
well, they had children, they had wives that they were in love with. They had a way, all of them, of looking back on the loss of Elvis Presley and other friends of theirs who'd passed away, musicians, everyone from Jimi Hendrix to Keith Moon, it made them quite sad. And it was wonderful to talk to all of them, over that 2-year period. So yes, I guess in a way it was all sort of within the same era, but not within a week of each other.
Right. And just to let you know, he actually pre-ordered your book on Kindle just now.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thanks, Colin. You rock.
No, Colin's a great guy.
Yeah,
well, since these are your memoirs, let me talk about you for a minute. So how old were you when you first got into music, would you say?
3.
3? So that young?
Yeah.
Your first memory was music. I think that's great.
Maybe even before.
Probably.
Yeah.
I think there's some of us that music is something to do dishes with, and there's us people like us, including all of us, That it's not just background noise, it's part of your life, it's part of your makeup, it's part of your identity. So how did you go from, in your mind, travel, being a fan, before you interviewed John Lennon, you got into radio? How did that come about?
Well, that was very exciting because when I got back from Bali, instead of going back to my original college, which was UCSC, University of California at Santa Cruz, I went to UC Berkeley to study journalism. And there I was in my very first news writing class. I turned in my first assignment, and the professor, the teacher, said to me, "Laurie, what are you doing in this class? You already know how to write." And I was so excited to hear that. And he said, "What you need to do is go find an internship, because that will lead to getting a job." So I went to the journalism department office and looked for internships at major newspapers, but it was already too close to the summer, so there weren't any left. But there was an ad up for KFRC in San Francisco, looking for an intern for their news department. They'd never had one before. So I thought, oh, that will be perfect. Music and news. And I immediately applied and got an interview within a few days and was immediately hired to be their first intern, and went to the radio station at end of that June. And it was so very exciting to be there and to start writing the first specials that aired early on Sunday morning on the public affairs area. And the news director was so excited, saying, "Oh my God, I can't wait to voice your specials for you. These are incredible. You're a great writer." And I said, "Great, I want to get a job here." And she said, "Well, when we have one, I'll definitely give you a call." And after the internship ended, I had a couple months go by where I had to get other news related jobs. And then the news director, Joe Interrante, called me and said, "Laurie, we have a job to offer you, news editor." So I immediately started there, and it was very exciting. It led to everything that I ever wanted to do, rock radio specials, because thanks to Joe's recommendation of me to Dave Sholin, I got to write RKO Presents the Beatles, which was the longest Beatles special ever done in the United States. At that time, it was originally 14 hours. And after it aired, we were able to syndicate it so that it aired all over the place. And we elongated it to 17 hours. So that was amazing. And then I got to be on the air at KFRC after being on the air at other stations in the country, and be a newscaster on KFRC. It was thrilling. It was the best part of my life, I'm happy to say.
Can anybody hear that Beatles broadcast anywhere, or is that gone?
Well, I don't know that it's around anymore, to be honest, because RKO isn't in business anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So it might be illegally in part on things like YouTube, but it's not being released as far as I know.
I'm sure some Beatles fanatic has it on bootleg, but Wayne asked a question I was going to ask. And I guess before we part, I heard that I didn't realize this till the Jericho interview. Did I understand right that the full John Lennon interview has never been fully released in any format, print or audio or anything like that? Is that accurate?
Never legally released, yes. RKO Radio Network had me write the special just a couple days after Lennon was assassinated, and that aired 6 days after John was killed on Sunday, December 14th. It's called John Lennon, The Man, the Memory was the name I gave it, and Dave Sholin voiced it, and Ron Hummel produced it, put in the interview bites and music and everything, but it didn't have the full interview. It was a 3-hour special, but I had done a lot of research and a lot of writing and a lot of dedication Yoko and Sean, of course, and the full interview itself has never been released. It is, as I said, illegally
Right.
posted on various.
I really want to commend you on your professionalism for being able to do that so soon after the tragedy, because having only met you, for this recording, for this live episode of Rat's Hot Review, that's not easy, the grieving that you must have gone through while you were doing that, for your radio station, and possibly having to hold that in while you're doing that. I I had been recently through a state of grieving myself, which is why talking to you about this subject is hitting home for me. But I really just wanted to give you a kudos and recognize your professionalism for going through with this. So
Well, thank you.
not with our interviewing you. I mean, with you doing your job.
Yeah, we're sorry you came on our show.
Yeah, we feel bad you came.
No, we're kidding.
But
So-
just wanted to say that also you mentioned before that you still love to listen to the radio. Who are some of the artists of today that you like?
Well, if I can be honest, I listen to classic rock radio.
Nothing wrong with that.
There are some bands that I really like these days. One of them is Dirty Honey. They get played a lot, and here in LA on KLOS. And another band that I like that isn't played so much on the radio, the Alalas, I like a lot. But to be honest, I'm more of a classic radio fan. It's always going to be the Beatles, the Stones, David Bowie, and so many others that I completely listen to forever and ever. AC/DC and so many other heavy metal bands. And I also love a lot of classic country artists too. Everybody from Garth Brooks to Dr. John. I mean, you name them. I love them. So
I thought you were going to say Waylon Jennings.
What about the band Severed Angel? Have you heard?
Oh,
of
come on,
Severed
Wayne.
Angel?
Why are you plugging
Yeah,
our band?
jeez.
It was only a matter of time.
Yeah.
That was not a segue, for the record.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Jeez. Anyway,
But you should listen to Severed Angel anyway. Any new band that you haven't heard of, listen to Severed Angel.
That was not a segue, for the record. For the record,
Yeah, that was
have to repeat it twice. One thing that all of us grew up with was, hearing, oh my God, is this band ever going to reunite? Is that band ever going to reunite? And of course, you had the original Black Sabbath, that reunion being talked about forever. Kiss, obviously, with the original 4 members, the 3 remaining members of the Beatles. I was on a podcast recently where I was asked that if John and George were still alive to this day, would they have reunited? My answer was no, because I think what they did for when they did it was perfect for that place and time, and magic like that can't be replicated because of the whole, lightning striking twice in the same place. It doesn't always happen. But and I'm not, and I'm somebody who believes in musical mitosis. I think that if something breaks up, if a band breaks up and the members break off into doing their own thing, then they create their own kind of greatness. Obviously, it happened with Ringo, it happened with George, and it happened with John, and it happened with Paul McCartney and Wings. Does it drive you nuts whenever you hear, oh my gosh, what if they are reunited? Should they have reunited? I mean, have you ever heard those kinds of questions being asked?
Well, people always ask me, do I think they would have gotten back together? And I think you're probably right. They wouldn't have. They might have done maybe a jam or two, but I don't know that it would have been all 4 of them necessarily. Who knows? I honestly can't say. But the thing is that, John was so excited about performing with Yoko. and making music with her, and Paul with Linda. So it would have been difficult for them to say, no, I'm not going to be with my best friend and my wife, who was my wife. I'm going to go back with my Beatles brothers. And I don't think that would have happened.
That live concert video that he did at Madison Square Garden was a great concert film that when I used to work at VH1 on back at Viacom, when we had VH1 Classic, we used to show that concert all the time, and it was a great view. My final question is, if John was alive today, what do you think he would say about the state of the world right now?
Well, he wouldn't be involved in politics at all, because he made a point of telling us that he did not vote and never planned to. And I think he would probably be talking about relationships between men and women. And that would be something important to him still to this day, would be my guess. But other than that, I would imagine that he would also be excited about his sons being older and being talented on their own, and talk about them a lot too. So that's just the guess that I have.
I think that's a great assumption, and again, that's awesome to recognize both Julian and Sean. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
What do you think about this? Yeah, no problem. What do you think about this new song this new Beatles song where John Lennon is going to be singing on it, that Paul McCartney is working on it? What do you think about that?
I'll know when I hear it.
Yeah. Are you excited to hear that, or do you not want to hear it? Because it's going to be like an AI thing involved, and a lot of people are against this. No AI.
No AI.
Now there's no AI. Okay.
Yeah. I don't. No.
Yeah.
I mean, Free as a Bird that they did in 1990 was really cool, because those were John Lennon demos, but it was created somewhat organically, as you can with a tape, somebody who's no longer here. But AI to try to recreate something that doesn't exist, or someone who isn't here, I'm not for that. I'm sure it's all in good intentions, but that's my opinion, Laurie, not anyone else's, I guess, on the panel.
James.
Actually, I didn't have anything. I was just enjoying
it.
I'll take it.
So
you're done.
Yeah.
What about you, Wayne?
Okay.
Do you have another question?
What about you, Wayne?
Yeah. Yes, I do actually. I have 3 more things here, and they're going to be quick. Since you did talk to Yoko Ono about like a half hour or so before John came in the room, was it easy to just get into a conversation with her? How did that conversation go?
It was amazing, and I describe it a lot in the book. It was very exciting because I was a fan of hers, conceptual art, and her book, Grapefruit, that I had brought a copy with me, and she was excited to see that I had. And I think she was also excited to see me because I was a female and everybody else in the room was a male. So I think that made her happy. And yeah, I really felt great being with Yoko.
Yeah. And you were told before the interview to not bring up the Beatles, and the main focus was supposed to be the Double Fantasy album. And John did end up bringing up the Beatles himself. Was there anything you wanted to ask him about the Beatles that you didn't get to?
Well, we were told not to bring it up and not to ask questions. So even though John brought up the Beatles, specifically Paul and how he met Paul and how George and Ringo ended up being in the band as well, that was exciting. But we still knew that we weren't supposed to jump in with questions about the Beatles because we didn't want to piss him off at all. So
was there anything you would have liked to have known, though?
Well, sure. I would have loved to have asked him questions about the Beatles and, how exciting it was and the concert and how weird it was when, nobody stopped yelling and screaming for them,
Right.
Because I was at a Beatles concert in 1966 as a kid at Dodger Stadium, and all I remember was screaming. And I could see them, but barely, because we had the biggest, highest seats way up. and couldn't hear the music practically. So, that's something that I would understand that would probably be very upsetting to them.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that because my mother-in-law saw the Beatles when they played at Shea Stadium, and she said all she could hear was the roar of the crowd over the instruments. She could barely hear anything else. She saw them, but when you have however many people Shea Stadium filled, it's no longer there anymore. Over, the four lads from Liverpool. Yeah, I mean, that would probably be annoying because you want to hear them play, but it's to be there in the middle of the rush of these screaming fans must have been crazy.
It was, and that's why I was so excited as I could go see Hard Day's Night and Help, the two Beatles movie. I was so excited to think, oh wow, I'm going to get to see them and hear the music, except that, crazy enough, in the theaters, all the teenage girls that were there were screaming too. So
That's hilarious. Yeah.
That's how popular they were.
You should have thrown your popcorn at them and go, be quiet.
It would have, I think 300 Beatle girls would have killed the one Beatle girl. I'm glad you didn't.
We could have taken them on. No, just kidding.
Yoko Ono gets a lot of hate for people saying that she broke up the Beatles. I don't think that's the case of it. What do you think?
I think that's bullshit. Nope, sorry.
No, she didn't break up the Beatles. Not at all. And even though, as I say in my book, 99.9% of the Beatles fans at the time looked at her and said, oh yeah, Yoko Ono broke up the Beatles. That's not what happened. That's not the case at all.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Well, I think a lot of it is like tall tales that have been told through time from, the group that grew up with them to the ones after who didn't. So it almost seems like Yoko would be the obvious scapegoat. But I mean, look, you kind of saw, if you saw the Let It Be film, you saw it themselves. You saw it for yourself that they were just past that point. It had to have broken up for their relationships as friends to have succeeded.
Yeah,
I'm ready to, break. No, just kidding, Wayne.
Well, I wanted to thank you, Laurie, for telling the story. I'm Colombian, Puerto Rican, so rock music wasn't a big thing at my house. Not that my parents had anything against it, just culturally not something they listened to. And I remember when John Lennon was murdered, I was 10 years old. I didn't really know who John Lennon was, and I had a passing of the Beatles. It was just a year before I got into music. I remember my mom being very sad about it. And my mother didn't listen to John Lennon. So that was the impact that he had, just as a human being. But someone like my mother didn't own a single John Lennon album in her life, or listen to the Beatles other than when, walking down the street in the Bronx, if they were on, that his murder, and I'm going to call it a murder because that's what it was, and, affected her. Also, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your personal story, not just to your interview with John Lennon, your experience with the Beatles and other musicians, just the fact that you shared your story. So thank you for your time and for sharing it.
Well, thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed the book.
I loved it. I listened. Well, actually, read it. Well, I listened to it because I have an app that reads the PDF file. So I listened to it at work, and I actually listened to it twice. So it's a very good book, and it's a very entertaining book as well.
Well, Laurie, I'm going to order it for a physical copy because I'm one of those people who have to hold it, just like your library back there. I have to hold it in my hands. I'll put it in my Beatles collection. So I'm going to read it carefully. This time I read it, but I didn't read it as carefully as I normally would, so I'm going to take the time to actually read it. And I'll probably have more questions for you one of these days after I reread it. Where can we get the book, Laurie?
Well, you can get it everywhere from my publisher's website to Amazon to the website of almost all the bookstores in the country now. And then on December 8th, the official release date, you can hopefully go to all the bookstores that you like and get it in person if that's what you like. And I will be doing book launch and signing events The one that I already have scheduled is December 8th, the 43rd anniversary day, here in Los Angeles at an incredible store on the Sunset Strip called Book Soup. And so that Friday night at 7 p.m., I'll be doing a book launch and signing event. And then hopefully soon after, shortly after, be traveling around the country and doing them in many other cities as well. And I should also say that what I'm currently doing right now is recording the audiobook version of Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper, my life leading up to John Lennon's last interview, which is pretty exciting, pretty difficult, but I'm having fun in the recording studio doing it.
Very
Well,
cool.
hopefully you come to New York, Long Island. I know there's a bookstore that does book signings and out in Huntington, and
It is
I'd love to
gone,
come.
so
Sorry,
that bookstore is gone.
it reopened
Oh, it did.
in a different location.
Oh, all right, cool.
And if you do come this way, we'd love. I know Wayne and I
Man,
would
what
love
are
to
you
come meet
laughing
you
at,
in person.
man? It closed like
Nothing.
4 years ago.
And it reopened after the pandemic in a new location.
All right,
Wayne,
cool.
read a
didn't know.
book.
I didn't. Wow.
Well, awesome. That's great to hear. And if any of you have any suggestions about bookstores or venues, please email me, let me know, and I will try and contact them.
All right, I'm gonna
More than
call.
happy to.
Yeah, Three Birds in Tampa, Florida. You'll love it. It's an indie store. It's and you'll love it. And I believe Kerouac sometimes hung out there before it became that. So it's right up your alley. You dig it. So
Great. And I will also be in Florida early next year, the Beatles Beach Fest. So
all right, cool.
that's something that anybody will be attending. Hopefully I'll be able to meet you.
Very cool.
Right.
Sounds good.
Well, thank you.
Laurie, thank you very much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. And thank you very much for having me.
Yeah,
Our
and
pleasure. Thank you.
all the luck to you with the book and everything, and hopefully it sells good, and hopefully people really like it. What do you want people to take from this book? I mean, because it's a really good book.
I want them to know my story and to know how when you go from a difficult childhood upbringing to have success and have an exciting life, that it's possible, and that it's something that a lot of people get to do. And I'm excited to be able to write about it.
Very cool. All right. Again, thank you very much, Laurie. And thank you everybody for watching. Please hit subscribe, ratsaladreview.com. Go order Laurie's book, Confessions of a Rock and Roll Name Dropper.
Links in the description.
Links, yeah, they will not right this second, but they will be there. So, but they'll be there, and go order that book, hit subscribe, and we will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Demone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Laurie. That was
Thank you,
great.
Laurie.